Out of the Ordinary Insights, brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
Joining me now is Paul Hinks, the chairperson of the Corporate Council on Africa. Paul, thanks very much for your time. Let's start with the organisation, Corporate Council on Africa. I see from the latest stats, around about 2012, November, you're sitting with about 155 members in the organisation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. It's increased in the last 2 months. The Corporate Council on Africa represents probably most of the major US companies that are investing in Africa. We did a study and it came to about 85% of all US investments in Africa are represented by CCA members.
I see now there's interest for African companies to take a position on the board and that you are going to do those respective allocations.
Yeah, this is a major step forward for CCA. In the past, since CCA was formed in 1992, the membership has been entirely American. Last board meeting on the 7th of January, we elected to allow African companies to join CCA, and that 25% of our board would come from African business leaders. We've already had applications from a number of African companies, mostly from Nigeria and South Africa at present, but then the word is only just starting to get out. We're hoping very much that we'll get a lot of South African companies join so that we can expand the business partnerships between the United States and Africa.
Now, how do you think it's going to change the mandate of Corporate Council on Africa?
It's not going to change the mandate at all. It's what it's going to do, it's going to be very helpful for US businesses to meet African businesses, but not just in the form of conferences, networking at conferences.
So beyond the talk shops?
Yeah, well, the main point is we want African companies to have a voice on that board in America. We want American companies to know how to do business in Africa, and not many do, to be quite frank. So what we're hoping is that relationships will build between the African business leaders and the American business leaders so that real partnerships are the result, and we see much more business investment from the United States, because right now people are extremely interested in Africa. Africa is getting a lot of attention in the US, which frankly it didn't do before.
Isn't it all about searching for yield, though? In a low-yield world, Africa is offering growth rates. The African Development Bank tabling 5.3% on the continent for 2013.
Yeah.
That's remarkable compared to other territories globally.
Well, absolutely. You just got to look at the United States and Europe to see what's going on there. There are certain countries in Africa which are their growth is off the charts. So for sure, there's great interest from the United States in investing. And as I just said, the problem we find is that US businesses just don't know how to go about doing business in Africa. So
what is the key to doing business in Africa? Obviously, drawing from your experience at Symbion. Partnerships.
Having partnerships with people who've got their feet on the ground and know how to do business in a particular country. You go to Kenya and you try to start off on your own, you ain't going to get anywhere. Nigeria, the same. So what Symbion has done, my company has done, is we've partnered with local people in all the places that we work. So we have partners in Tanzania, we have partners in Nigeria, and we now have a partner in South Africa.
Tell us a little bit about how long you've been on the African continent operating as Symbion Power.
Since 2010. Personally, I've been doing business in Africa since 1980. So I've been through quite a change across the continent in that period of time.
The biggest change that you've seen over that period? 1980 takes us way back, so you were really dealing with darkest Africa then.
Absolutely. Well, literally. I went on my first trip to Tanzania. I was asked to carry light bulbs and toilet rolls in my briefcase when I went to Dar es Salaam, and I needed them because the hotel room didn't have lights.
So obviously the gap for the power opportunity. How much traction have you received? I see you've got 3 power plants operating in Tanzania itself, and then obviously established in Nigeria. What traction are you seeing? Because having just come back from Davos and the World Economic Forum, infrastructure concerns are one of the biggest issues facing the continent, and obviously this addresses it.
Yeah, you hear that everywhere, that Africa's infrastructure needs improvement. What's happening in a number of places, as you say, places like Tanzania, Ghana, Rwanda, the GDP is literally off the charts. They're not building power plants in these places fast enough to cope with normal growth, let alone rapid growth. So what's happening is the available capacity is being outstripped year upon year upon year. So there's a great opportunity for anybody in the power sector to get into private power opportunities where they're allowed. South Africa, of course, is not yet having IPPs, I believe. But Tanzania has many IPPs. Nigeria is privatizing its electricity at the moment. We've just made an investment in Nigeria too.
You must have had your eye on the Inga hydropower dam project that has taken now some 2 decades to come to fruition. I believe it is on the cards, having addressed this as a matter of urgency with President Jacob Zuma. Do you think that that is going to revolutionize power supply on the continent?
It would do if it ever happens.
You don't believe it's going to happen?
I thought it was more than 2 decades. Inga's been talked about. It's a huge resource. Inga's been talked about and talked about and talked about, and there's been commissions, and everybody wanted to build transmission lines from Inga to South Africa, but reality is, so far, all it's been is a lot of talk.
What is needed to catapult that project? Because again, if it is a solution to power needs, surely it's about private sector, players like yourself, like Symbion, sitting down with the government of the day or the governments of the territory and saying, let's help you put this together. Could you do that?
We couldn't because we're too small, but there are companies with the capacity to do something like Inga, although it's a huge, huge project, it's a huge resource. So I don't know what the problems have been to actually stop that project from happening, but I believe that it could have been done if people had been focused on bringing in the right private players. I think that the fundamental problem must be what is the investment cost for such a huge hydro scheme, which takes many years to build. You have to sink a lot of capital, and then how are you going to get paid? If you're going to do it
guaranteed returns. How do you know that your risk is worth the reward ultimately?
Yeah, it's like that.
But that's a question you must ask yourself in every foray on the continent.
Correct. Everything you look at the investment cost, you look at what you're going to get paid for the electricity, you look at, are you going to get paid for the electricity? How are you going to be guaranteed? Because often you have one off-taker. So that one off-taker, if he doesn't pay you, you're not going to get paid by somebody else.
How does Africa compare with Afghanistan?
Oh, it's beautiful compared to Afghanistan.
In terms of business climate?
Yeah, I'm only talking about business climate. It's a beautiful country, physically, but I mean, there is no comparison.
But you operated, Symbion operated in Afghanistan for some time.
Yeah, it is one of the most difficult places on the planet to work. It's more difficult to get things done in Afghanistan than it is in Iraq, where we've done a lot of work also. The safety situation, the security situation is awful. Today, Kabul is not like it was even 5, 6 years ago. Today, it's a much more dangerous city. But then in the south, in Helmand province, and on the Pakistan border, I mean, you literally, if you are not protected by heavy, heavy security, your life is in danger. So
Africa safe by comparison?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was asked recently a question in Nigeria on a CNBC program, actually, whether or not, or what we thought about the security situation in Nigeria. My answer was the security situation in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. And my answer was that it's like going on holiday after being in Afghanistan and Iraq for 8 years.
Looking at unlocking further potential, what is the key? If you look at Nigeria, let's take regions now. Nigeria and West Africa. Can you use Nigeria to leverage into Ghana and Guinea and perhaps even moving to Côte d'Ivoire?
I think each country is different. And often, I don't think you can leverage Nigeria in Ghana or
so it's not, you're not looking at West Africa, you're still taking country by country?
No, for us it's country by country. Each country has its own character, it has its own culture. Often, if you say, you know, there are issues, you say you're leveraging it from Nigeria, they actually don't like it in other countries, or the other way around. So I think Nigeria, which for me is probably the most vibrant place in Africa today, business-wise. There's a huge amount of opportunity there. Nigeria is Nigeria. We wouldn't leverage anywhere for Nigeria or the other way.
What will be interesting for our audience is because you have a presence in Tanzania and other East African countries versus Nigeria.
Yeah.
Two very different cultures, and you've said obviously that you celebrate the Nigerian potential and the business environment there.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that East Africa, Tanzania is saturated, Kenya is saturated
No.
by comparison?
No, not at all. There are many opportunities in Tanzania. There are many opportunities in Kenya. Of course, everybody's waiting to see what happens in Kenya in March during the elections.
The whole country's come to a standstill at the moment.
The whole country is grinding to a standstill as we come into March for the election process, and I think a lot of people are fingers crossed that the elections are going to go well, and that after that there will be a stable government that can get things done.
Does that concern you in terms of the political situation could change so radically that it could impact your business interests in Kenya negatively?
Yeah, we're not in Kenya. We're watching Kenya. We would like to be in Kenya, but it will depend upon the result of these elections. We have our own favourites, and we feel it will be better under a certain type of government than another type of government. So it will depend upon who wins that election.
Watching Captains of Industry here on CNBC Africa. I'm speaking to Paul Hinks, the Chairman of the Corporate Council on Africa.